Hi, and welcome back to day 3 of the Hemlock Tee video sew-along. In our previous 2 episodes, we gave you an introduction to the pattern, talked about fabric selection and supplies, helped you choose a size, and walked you through the process of printing and assembling your pattern. Today's episode is all about cutting your fabric. We'll discuss pre-treating your fabric, layout, and cutting. A lot of people are scared of cutting knit fabric because the rules are a bit different than wovens, but there's no need to be. Nothing you do needs to be perfect. Just give it your best, and there's always next time to incorporate what you've learned. If you have any questions on this or any other videos from this series, just let us know in the comments below. With that, let's get started. Before we talk about cutting, let's first talk about how knit fabric is made. Unlike woven fabric, which is formed by weaving horizontal weft yarns over and under a series of vertical warp yarns on a loom, knit fabric is made by knitting row by row of interlocking loops from one continuous yarn on a knitting machine. It's because of this looped construction that knit fabric is stretchy, even if made without any stretch fibers, such as Lycra. Now we'll discuss pre-treating and prepping your fabric. As with any fabric, you're going to want to wash and dry your fabric prior to cutting to reduce or eliminate shrinkage in your final garment. Make sure you wash your yardage using the same method and settings that you're planning to use to wash your finished garment. So say you want to wash your finished hemlock on cold. You'd wash your yardage on cold. If you're going to wash the finished hemlock on warm, wash the fabric on warm. Same thing goes for drying. The only caveat is if you're planning on line drying your finished hemlock, I would advise against line drying the fabric yardage. If you hang a few yards of knitted fabric, the weight of the wet fabric can cause it to stretch out of shape on the line. In some cases, you may not be able to get the fibers to relax back into their original shape without wetting the fabric again. So, if you plan on line drying, try putting the fabric in your dryer on the air setting. Although knit fabrics don't usually wrinkle to the same degree as wovens, I would still make sure you take your fabric out of the dryer right away. That way any wrinkles you do have don't set and you have less pressing to do. This is a good habit to get into with all your fabrics, though honestly I don't always remember. If you need to press your fabric, try to handle it gently so you don't stretch the knit fibers too much. The next step in cutting your pieces is laying out the fabric. Laying out knit fabric for cutting is similar to wovens, but there are a few things you're going to want to take into account that are specific to knits. First off, you're going to need to determine the right and wrong side of your fabric. The right and wrong side of a knit are different than the right and wrong side on a woven fabric. Here we're going to talk about knit jersey, which is the fabric we recommend for the hemlock pattern. On the right side of the fabric, you'll find columns and rows of V-knit stitches. You can see here on this bulky hand-knit fabric a large-scale version of what you're looking for in miniature on your jersey yardage. On the wrong side, you'll find rows of purl bumps, which you can again see here in large scale. You can also tell the right and wrong side of a jersey fabric by which way the different parts of it roll. Due to the way the stitches are formed, the selve edges will roll to the wrong side, while the crosswise cut edges will roll to the front. When working with wovens, this is the point where you lay your fabric out with the selve edges together. Well, it's the same thing with knits, though the selve edges might look a little different, and on some fabrics, like knits made in a tube, they might not exist at all. A lot of people have you fold the right sides of the fabric together, but I prefer to fold mine with the right sides facing out. If you're working with a stripe or print, I find it much easier to choose which parts of the print I want where when the right side is facing out. Often, it's harder to see the print on the wrong side of a fabric due to the printing techniques used. Another difference between laying out your knits and wovens is that often knit fabrics are slightly skewed. To avoid accidentally cutting your fabric off grain, here's how I lay out my knit fabric for cutting. I first lay out one side of the fabric flat, using my hands to sort of pat out any wrinkles and smooth the fabric into place. Then I fold the other side of the fabric over top of the half I just smoothed into place, aligning the selve edges. You'll want one column of V-stitches running up the fold. I eyeball this, but if you're new to knits or are just a much more accurate person than I am, you may want to mark this with pins or a length of thread. If your folded fabric is on grain, the folded edge will lay nicely, smooth and flat. If the fabric is off grain, the folded edge will torque and wrinkle. To remedy this, shift the selve edge so that it lays flat and smooth out the rest of the fabric. You'll want to be gentle while moving your fabric into place and smoothing out wrinkles. You can do this with a patting motion, or I like to do this sort of a scoop with my nails, like this. I also use this technique for slippery or unstable wovens. It pulls just the area you're running your nails over into place without affecting the rest of the fabric. Once your fabric is aligned and laying flat, you might notice that the cut edges are quite off. Don't worry about that. The fabric was likely twisted on the bolt and was cut crooked. As long as your selve edges and fold are aligned properly, you're good to go. In some cases, you might find that your knit selve edge is tighter than the actual fabric, causing it to gather along that edge. This is relatively common, and there's an easy fix to get it to relax. Simply snip through the selve edge every 2 or so inches until it's relaxed and lays evenly with the body of the fabric. One more thing to keep in mind while laying out your fabric is that you'll want to try to keep the entire length on the cutting table as much as possible. If you have fabric hanging off the table, the weight of that yardage can stretch the fabric on the table, resulting in your cut pattern piece not quite ending up the right size. I also recommend laying your fabric out on a smooth surface, as it will be much easier to get your fabric laid out properly. Surfaces like carpet will stick to the knit, and you'll have a much harder time getting it flat, relaxed, and wrinkle-free. To lay out your fabric, you're going to want to find the cutting diagrams in your instruction booklet. Each of our patterns has a complete set of diagrams, which we've designed to give you the best fabric yield. In the Hemlock instruction booklet, you'll find these starting on page 7. Select the layout that matches your fabric width, pattern size, and which version of the pattern you're cutting. One thing to keep in mind with these layouts is that we have not laid them out for directional fabric. Directional fabric is a fabric with a clear top and bottom to the print or design, such as flowers with a stem, people, etc. When cutting directional fabric, you'll want to make sure that the tops of each pattern piece align with the top of the print. So for the hemlock, our diagram for non-directional fabric has the pattern pieces laid out like so. If we had a directional print, where the top of the print is to our left and the bottom of the print is to our right, we'd need to realign the pattern pieces like this. Now the tops of all the pattern pieces are to the left, same as our print, and the bottoms are to the right. Once you've figured out which direction your pattern pieces should lay, we'll need to make sure they're aligned parallel to the selve edge and fold so that they're properly on grain. The front, back, and neckband pieces are to be cut along the fold, so those 3 are easy. For the sleeve, use a ruler or tape measure to make sure the grain line of each pattern piece is parallel, like so. I weighed my pattern pieces down with professional cloth weights, but you can use anything. Cloth weights, also known as pattern weights, are made from cast iron and weigh about 4 pounds each. They're made to weight pattern to cloth while tracing and cutting, and are low profile so you can easily maneuver around them. You can find these at any pattern making supply store. Small cloth weights for home sewing are available at most sewing supply stores, or you could use washers, cans of food. Anything heavy and relatively low profile works great. Another option for keeping your pattern in place is pinning it to the fabric. One of my favorite things about sewing is that there are so many ways to do so many different things and end up with the same result. You just have to find what works best for you. Now that your pattern pieces are in place, you'll need to cut them out. I prefer to trace around my pattern pieces, remove the pattern, then cut, rather than cutting around the paper on the fabric. And I'll show you why in a minute. To trace, I like to use a Clover Choco liner. It has this little wheel that turns while you trace and releases a line of chalk onto your fabric. The wheel turning as you trace reduces the drag on the fabric while you work, compared to a marking tool like a chalk pencil. I also like to pick the wheel up every few inches just to make sure I'm not accidentally dragging the fabric out of alignment. Mark your notches with the chalk as well. You don't want to forget those. I then remove the pattern piece, replace the weight, and cut around the pattern piece with scissors, using my free hand to assist in keeping the fabric stable as I cut. You can also add pins at this stage if you're worried about things shifting as you work. Cut around your pattern pieces and clip your notches. Again, making sure not to cut further in than half of the seam allowance. So in the case of the hemlock, your notch clips will be cut 1/8 inch into the pattern piece. I'll now show you the reason I don't cut around the actual paper pattern with scissors, but rather trace it off. You can see here when you're cutting with the pattern on the right side of your scissors, everything seems fine. But when you get to a point where you need to cut with the pattern on the left side of the scissors, it's very hard to get a smooth line without jagged edges that's close to the pattern, especially on curves. If you're left-handed, this will be reversed, but still hold true. It's not impossible, I just don't like doing it as much. You can see as you get into this curve, it's very hard to keep the pattern in place. And this would be the same if it's pinned to it or not. If it's pinned to it, it's going to just pull the fabric out and stretch the fabric. So this is why I like to always remove the pattern piece. You can also see it's not as smooth. Here we have a jagged line. So my best practice when using scissors is to remove the pattern before cutting. A lot of people prefer to cut their fabrics with a rotary cutter. This isn't my preferred method because I don't feel like I have the same fine control as I do with scissors, and honestly, I'm just a bit clumsy with them. Of course, which method you use is completely up to you, and whatever method you feel more comfortable with is the method that's best for you. Are you sensing a theme yet? When you use a rotary cutter, you're going to have to make sure you've laid your fabric out on top of a rotary mat. This will protect both your cutting table and the rotary blade. At this point, it's up to you whether you want to remove the pattern piece or cut around it. I like to trace and remove the pattern piece because I find it difficult to cut without nicking the pattern. As a person who likes to make a pattern more than once, I find that once I've sliced into the pattern, it's harder and harder to keep it nice for the next time I make that garment. So after I've traced the pattern, I'll then remove it and weight the fabric down, just as I did with scissors. I'll then trace around the cutting line with my rotary until the piece is cut out. Make sure you have a fresh blade so you're actually cutting through all the layers. I'm not sure if you can see here, but as I cut, the fabric tends to start scooting ahead of my rotary blade. If you notice your fabric doing the same, you can pick your blade up every few inches to combat this fabric movement. I do recommend going back in and notching with scissors, since it can be difficult to create such a small notch with a rotary blade, and you do not want to cut past your seam line. not sure which cutting method you prefer, try both. Knits are very forgiving, and the only way you'll determine which method is best for you is by trying them all out. All right, that's it for today. Get your fabrics cut, and I'll see you back here for our next lesson. If you've missed any of our previous Hemlock sew-along lessons, you can find them by clicking the link here. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you can get updates on each new lesson we post. Now get out there and get your fabric cut, and I'll see you next time. Bye!